As you all know, the session is really ramped up, and there have been, as a result of the snow days and or ice days, whatever we want to call them, and the flu, we've had a number of days that we've been delayed, kind of in getting the budgetary process going. So we're pushed back a little bit in that. And then last week, I'll just say that there were a couple of meetings that I had to attend that conflicted with times that we would schedule. So a little bit of this pushback and rushed momentum is on me. I want to thank all the members of both the Court of Appeals that are here today and the Supreme Court. Thank you very much for being here. Appreciate your time. I know that there are several members of our committee who are also on the Rules Committee for the House. And as of Thursday morning, after we had already set our schedule, the chairman of the Rules Committee made it abundantly clear to all members of the Rules Committee that if they did not show up for their meeting, and this is the next meeting after that announcement this morning, then they may see themselves demoted from the committee. So we are short-staffed this morning in terms of membership because of the Rules Committee meeting, and I'm buying them a little bit of time by talking so much. So what we hope to have happen is that they will, and I sent them a text assuring them that they should be in the Rules Committee meeting, and we'll see them when they get done. So hopefully they'll come on over afterwards. But, and there's the text coming back to me saying whatever it's saying. The other part of this is that just as an opener, the committee and the staff, with Brian Groom here, we have been in discussions with leadership from both courts to ask you both to provide us with with a 5-year plan. Given that the new Judicial Center will be built and online, I believe by September of next year, that it is prudent to kind of try to look out in time and see what our expenditures are moving forward. I know a number of the individuals of the courts have made a lot of internal adjustments in their offices and rooming, and locations are spread out all over the judicial building as well as the Department of Health's building to bide time while the Judicial Center was going. So there have not been an overabundance of requests. And so what we see happening is that we are allowing for that adjustment and then the accommodations that hopefully will be made in the Judicial Center. But having that 5-year plan will help us to see where you foresee yourself being by the time the Judicial Center is built and staffed. So with that, I'll ask Chief Judge Stephen Diller to present on behalf of the Court of Appeals. And thank you very much for being here this morning. Let me turn your mic on. Okay, go ahead.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, other committee members and staff. Appreciate being here today, have an opportunity to discuss our budget. Also want to thank the Chairman for coming by the court and letting us give you a little bit of a tour and a kind of an operational breakdown of all the things that are happening at the Court of Appeals. We'll just dive right into it, starting with line item 5.1.1. This is a budget change to account for the increase in the daily expense allowance provided to judges of the Court of Appeals who reside more than 50 miles from the Judicial Building in Atlanta, from 30 to 35 days per term. Currently, 8 of the court's 15 members receive this allowance, and there are 3 terms of court per year. The next item is 5.1.2. This is a budget change that concerns the funds necessary to annualize a central staff position that the General Assembly approved last year and which became effective on January 1, 2018. We recently hired an experienced and highly capable staff attorney to fill this position. We're very grateful to the committee, to the General Assembly, and to the governor for filling this, making this position possible. As I think I mentioned to you, Chairman, the other day, the importance of central staff can't be overstated with all the things that are happening with our court, with the jurisdictional shift and the expansion of our court from 12 to 15 judges. Having the increased central staff positions has really assisted us greatly. In fact, one of the positions you filled last year, our deputy court administrator, because we're increasing the sizes now, to overseeing that staff, which gives us greater efficiency in management.
Tell the committee members your vision for the use of the central staff. I thought that was highly effective at going forward. If you wouldn't just mind telling us a little bit about that.
Sure. So very quickly, there are kind of three central things that our central staff attorneys do. They review every case for jurisdictional issues when they come in the door to make sure that we have jurisdiction. If not, those cases are dismissed. They also, during that jurisdictional review, actually identify cases that they believe can be handled on what we call per curiam basis. That's basically an opinion that goes out without the name of a judge on behalf of the court in more routine cases, and those cases are taken in batches. And our central staff attorneys in an opinion writing group write those more routine opinions and free up our chambers attorneys for the judges to actually handle the more complex cases. The central staff attorneys also handle discretionary and interlocutory applications, and probably perhaps most importantly, they actually float, what we call float go-in chambers when chambers attorneys are out sick. What we've done in the past few years is we've restructured our central staff, and as I mentioned earlier, the key to that is to identify cases that are more routine in nature, to allow those to be handled in central staff, and freeing up and reducing the caseload of the staff attorneys and judges in chambers to allow them to not only handle more complex cases on that judge's caseload, but to also free up time to review other judges if they're on a panel or whole court cases. So it's all about increasing the efficiency of the court through the central staff, and so it's been revolutionary, and the numbers, quite frankly, compared to the old system, have been staggering in terms of how many cases we're getting completed through the central staff system that we've adopted.
Are you allowing for a specialization of the centralized staff?
That's one of the things we definitely foresee in the future, is trying to identify categories of cases and hiring staff attorneys that would, for example, handle workers' compensation cases, employment cases, and to give us, especially in areas where there are cases where judges sometimes have to start from scratch because they may only have 1 or 2 or 3 workers' comp cases in a 3 or 4 year period. So having somebody who specializes in that, I think, will be useful. That's more down the road. Right now, the increase in central staff is really to account not only for the jurisdictional shift, the divorce cases, the wills, the title of land cases, but also to account for the expansion of the court from 12 to 15, the 9 new staff attorneys. It's not uncommon. I've been doing this 3 years now as vice chief and chief of the court. We had a period where we had 5 staff attorneys in chambers that were all out at one time. That puts a significant strain. So the idea is kind of a flexible central staff attorney corps that when times are good and we don't need them filling in chambers, they can get a lot of cases out and help us reduce our caseload and make us more efficient. When times are tough and a lot of people are sick and out on maternity leave or extended family leave, we're able to cover that those absences, but still deal with our core functions in central staff. So that's the necessity of it, and that's why we're thankful for the position that was granted. And we're also asking this year, to get to the next line, we're asking for 1 new position that would start. This is 5.1.3 that would actually start effective July 1. And I think, Chris, that would bring us up to 14 or 15 total, bring us up to 14. In the future, I think we'd like to have a discussion with the committee about maybe moving toward term staff attorneys, where we would hire younger attorneys that would stay for 1 or 2 years in central staff. That would help out, maybe to reduce some of the cost while still handling some of the more routine matters. But that's just something for a future day. But I appreciate the chairman mentioning that this restructuring of our central staff is an ongoing process, and it's been accounted for in the new building. You were asking about the new building. It's been accounted for in that as well, the kind of future growth of our central staff. If there are no other questions about central staff, I'd move on to 5.1.4. This is a budget change that seeks to increase funds for the ongoing software maintenance for our Laserfish workflow system. You know, I don't know that I'm an expert on that sort of thing. What I do know is it helps us move toward a paperless office. I think last year we asked for a one-time expense. That got us current. Isn't that right, Jan? It got us current. And now we want to, on an ongoing basis, we want to get rid of paper and digitize as much as possible. So that's what that particular line item does. 5.1.5 and 5.1.6 both eliminate funds for one-time funding of purchase of furniture for our new central staff and the one-time funding that I just mentioned of scanning and digitizing all existing financial records. This brings us to 5.1.7, which is somewhat of an unusual budget item because we're not sure whether the estimated costs of all this information technology expenses related to our new judicial building should really be included in the budget or whether it's going to be bonded out. At this point, what we know is that we're moving into a new building in September of 19. We know that we are holding off on replacing equipment in our court that would normally be past its serviceable life because we're moving into that new building. We know this is going to have to be in the new building. We're not entirely sure. Our best advice at this point, after several discussions with GBA and everyone concerned with the new building, is that we should put it in the budget for the time being. Now, I'm happy. I can go into a breakdown of the different things that would be included in this, but that's why it's in here for now. And whether or not it's bonded out later is something kind of above my pay grade.
Brian, you had that breakdown, didn't you? Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
The other, I would also be remiss if I didn't point out that there will likely be other expenses related to the new building that we'll need to ask for in the future, such as furniture cost, moving cost, space rental, those sorts of things. At this point, we haven't put them in because we don't have enough information at this point to really ask, or we're not sure it's the appropriate time. 5.1.8, this is a budget request that seeks to increase funds for 30 more licenses for our disaster recovery backup software. This is in line, of course, with our strategic goal of improving the efficacy of the court's internal structure. Actually, everything I've just said is in line with our 5-year plan. In fact, I think I joked with you, Chairman, it's in line with beyond 5 years, especially with regard to
30-year plan.
Our 30-year plan for central staff. So 5.1.9, the last line item, this is a budget request that seeks to increase funds for the one-year subscription for cybersecurity training program that our users will complete online. It's also in line with our strategic goals. As I know Chief Justice Hines can mention, the Judicial Council has really made this cybersecurity a great focus for not only the appellate courts but the courts throughout the state. So we're trying to do what we can to stay on top of all that. And unless there's any questions, that's all I have.
Questions from members of the committee? Can you tell us, Chief Judge, how is your caseload since the jurisdictional shift? Could you tell us about the caseload?
I can. I'm
now,
glad you asked that. I skipped over that part when but we actually have in 2017, just to give you the increased. We actually went up 119 new cases as a result of the new jurisdiction. As I think we've mentioned before, we anticipated that the greatest increase would come from divorce cases. That accounted for 63 of the 119 new matters. Our total matters, and I'm talking about, when I talk about total matters, I'm talking about discretionary applications, interlocutory applications, direct appeals, and emergency motions. Those kind of are the 4 core groups that we talk about with matters. The total for 2017 was 3,134. In 2016, that's up from 3,040. And we anticipate some of that, the down period was as a result of the year before the jurisdictional shift happened and the increase from 12 to 15 judges. So we anticipate that it will continue to go up. Now, I've got a whole lot of information here where I could really geek out on the statistics and go into detail. I don't want to bother y'all with that this morning, but if you want to come over, if you want copies of our breakdown and statistics for the last 3 years, we're happy to provide those.
Okay, very good. And also, are you getting more cases directed down to you from the Supreme Court? How is that? Is there an increase in terms of the after a cert may be granted a remand back to the Court of Appeals?
You know, I don't know. I don't know that I've looked at that. You mean after they grant one of our cases and it comes back down to us? Those, in most cases, result in nothing more than a paragraph opinion that we write, basically saying what the Supreme Court did, that's our judgment when we send it back to the trial court. Sometimes there are things that remain to be done, and that's when we actually have to, if there was some issue we didn't address that we now have to address because of the Supreme Court's opinion, I can get those. I can try. I don't know that I'd have to look and see whether our system can actually come up with that.
Okay.
But I anticipate we will see more of that because of the increased cert. That they've become more of a certiorari court. So I anticipate they'll grant more certs, and in turn those cases will increase.
That was kind of my expectation. So
Yeah.
like, see if those numbers are showing out or what they're showing.
Yeah, that's a great question, and I don't know that we currently have that in our statistics, but I'd be happy to look into that and get back with
Okay.
you.
Thank you.
Okay.
Any other questions for the committee members? Thank you very much, Chief Judge. We appreciate you being here
Thank
very
you.
much, and your staff, and good to see you, Charlie, as well.
And
I have a few bills I need you to carry to the Senate, but you don't do that anymore, so.
I'll just say I know that some of the committee members couldn't make it to the tour.
Yes.
First of all, we just want to make it clear that you are always invited at the Court of Appeals as a group or individually. We'd love to have you, give you a tour and show you whatever you'd like to see.
Yeah, and Bill and Micah, and I know y'all couldn't make it, but let me just tell you, it's worth a look, because one of the things that we saw was the file room that they had, and with the microfiche and the transition of all the documents to digital, what was a full file room, and I had seen it years before, is now about half. In terms of the documents, it looks like you've dwindled it down to about half the number of shelves that were occupied before now seem to be free. But it's impressive to see how much they've done in terms of moving it to digital. And then the other aspect of this is to see how scattered the judges are, and how that wreaks a little bit of a havoc in trying to have a discussion as a panel about your cases. That creates a modest hindrance to that, but in the new building that will not be the case. So.
And that's why we're so grateful for the new building, and I'm glad you were able to see that. And a lot of the credit for that hard work in the file room and other aspects of us moving toward a paperless office is due to Steve Castlin's leadership and our staff over there. They've done an amazing job, so we're thankful for that.
Thank you so much. Chief
Thank
Judge.
y'all. Appreciate it.
So if y'all get time, go over. It's about an hour. I mean, and Chief Judge Dillard is excellent at taking you around and showing you all this stuff.
I was the first one to sign up for every one of the tours, and then the third change. Yeah.
That's right.
I'm a frustrated tour guide, so come back. I'd love to take you.
Chief Justice Hines, we would be so honored to have you and Presiding Justice Melton to join us. I see we have Justice Nels Peterson with us this morning. Please join us, and we're anxious to hear your presentation.
Well, I have done this for many years, and so, Mr. Chairman and representatives and Mr. Groom, I'm going to let some of these other guys do it a little bit on the 5-year plan.
We'll be on section 10 of your track sheet.
Let me just tell you briefly what we have on our budget request in here. Our first request is simply an increase, as Chief Judge Dillard referred to, about the judges who live 50 miles more from the judicial building in Atlanta. And what this is, an increase of to bring forward the 30 to 35 days per term. And we have one justice that's involved in that, is what we have. And that's just simply that. The other one is, the second one is actually an increase for funds. It's a pass-through from the Georgia State Patrol for the trooper assigned to our court, and we have that. The third is we've gone from now 9 to 9 justices from 7, and the Westlaw is an increase for research, and that is the increase because of that additional amount, and that is in 3. The increase on 4 is for the National Center for State Courts. That's based on population, and what we do is in our budget for everybody. So that includes everybody, but it is in our budget. And the other one that I want to talk to, and we want to let you speak to Justice Melton and also Justice Peterson about the additional attorneys we would have. We have 2 attorneys per justice. The chief has 3. We have 2. In our central staff, we have 5. And then we have 2 for death penalties. On our 5 in central staff, they not only check every case for jurisdiction, which we refer to as a red tag, they also do cert memorandums to us. They also do to us habeas memorandums, and they also work on per curiam. We are an in-bank court. Every justice reviews every case. We sit on every case. We do not issue unpublished opinions. The only ones that you might say occasionally will have a Rule 59. So it's a rarity. On the only per curiams we're putting out are actually in death penalty cases. No, excuse me, in per curiams in disciplinary cases. And they are also worked on originally by the central staff, but then they also come to our own staff. Our own 2 law clerks are doing submit briefs on every case, or a bench brief if it's going to be orally argued. Have huge responsibilities. They will tell you a little bit about the amount of cases that we've seen. We're seeing a lot of cases too. We're pleased that University of Chicago, I think, and also one of our sister courts, Massachusetts, said we're the most productive Supreme Court of the 50 states, so we're proud of that. We would like to tell you those are what we really need. We truly need additional law clerks for our justices. And the other thing that I'll ask them to talk to you about is also we need what we call a facilities procurement coordinator. We use that terminology only because we've been told, I think by GBA, to use that term, but they will tell you what that is. And also we would like a funding also for an intake clerk, and that is in here. As Chief Judge Dillard referred to, we have put in here a sum regarding our new building. We don't know if it'll be bonded out, but we've been asked by GBA, gave us a number to put in for security, for backup power supply, and for network equipment. And that is what we're having, what we're asking for now. Our clerk of court also serves as our court executive. So we've got one person doing that. We have a chief deputy clerk. Be glad to answer any questions, but I do want these gentlemen to speak to you, as you requested, about a 5-year plan. We did that. I think we were the first to do this e-filing. We are an e-filing court, and I think we're the first to do that, I think, in a long time. So you can file anything by e-filing now. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chief Justice. Any questions for Chief Justice Hines? Yes, sir.
Chairman, may I?
Yes, go ahead.
What does that work out, Mr. Chief Justice, as far as the per attorney that you're looking at? You got a figure of $1,774,000. We're talking about 9 new, and that would work out with how much per attorney?
Well, I'll have to
About close to 200.
probably with all the benefits, and Justice Melton has that right here.
I give it to you now, Mr.
Yes, sir.
Chairman. It's 121 is the base salary.
Plus benefits.
Plus benefits would be about 76,000.
Mm-hmm.
The 197 per.
That's about 200,000. Okay.
That's where it is. Salary plus that.
Any other
Justice
questions,
Melton
Mr.
might
Chairman?
want to speak to that, and I don't know if Justice Peterson wants to talk about the 5-year plan. All right. Please go ahead, Justice Melton.
Presiding Justice
Presiding
Melton,
Justice Melton.
good to see you.
Always good to see you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Chief, for allowing me to have the floor in front of this distinguished body.
What, if I could, just, Mr. Chief Justice, did you want to say anything about the Georgia Bulldogs versus the Auburn Tigers before we?
I think I have the floor, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chairman, I would expect no less than a comment like that from President Melton. But I will say this, we're on the ascendant, And they're on
How much royalty does he get in the ad?
Very little, very little.
And next year in Athens, it's gonna be all one-sided.
So, a 5-year plan. I believe, Mr. Chairman, you were one of the first ones to suggest that we give some thought about a 5-year plan. And initially, when anybody suggests a 5-year plan, the response is, why would anybody want to do that? It takes a lot of work and it requires a lot of discipline, but we all realize that that is a very healthy exercise to undertake. It brings discipline to our budget requests, and we view it as a way to partnership with you as legislators and help you know that you're not being nibbled away at. You can see a vision for where we're going, and so we're happy to engage in that alongside with you. So the plan that we have developed, and I believe we have copies if you haven't received them already, deals with where we are and where we're going. And so first of all, in terms of where we are and where we're going, we need to thank you and your colleagues for the jurisdictional shift. That's a huge development for us to move forward. The question that you asked earlier is our caseload less because of the jurisdictional shift? And the answer is no, not really. The reason is because our murder direct appeal cases has gone up by over 60% over the last 5 years, 60% over the last 5 years. We don't know the reason why that's happened. We couldn't have seen that coming. We didn't predict it happening, but it did happen. And so the jurisdictional shift as a practical matter came just in time, and it kept us from really drowning. And so it's important in terms of helping us be efficient. As the chief mentioned, we sit as a group of 9. We decide every case together. We view every case as a group project, and believe me, every opinion that makes it out the door is very much a group project. If you can get one out the door without some edits, you've done a great job. It's very difficult for that to happen. And just by way, as an example of what this shift means as a practical matter, before the jurisdictional shift, if we had a divorce case where there's a $25 error, a math error, in the worksheet, we would have to grant that application, and we would decide that as a court of 9. With the jurisdictional shift, that can go to the Court of Appeals to be addressed by panels in 3, and under the chief's leadership, if they decide that that's a routine case, that can be handled per curiam. It's just a much more efficient way of resolving that kind of case. And then if something happens in the midst of that causes us to be concerned that there's some gravity that needs to be addressed, we can grant cert and deal with it at that point. And so I do need to thank my colleagues on the Court of Appeals for their willingness to participate in that. It helps us out a great deal. So thank Chief for his leadership and Chief Doyle as well. So we are a busy court. We are busy now as we have ever been. By any measure, we are one of the busiest courts in the country, as the Chief mentioned. He mentioned the University of Chicago School of Law study that was in 2008. And in that study, Georgia had 58 and a third opinions per justice. 58 and a third opinions per justice. The mean across the country was 23 opinions per justice. So we're almost double, we're more than double, and we're 18% more opinions per justice than the second highest. 18% more opinions per justice than the second place state. Then more recently, there's the survey out of the Supreme Court of Massachusetts, a colleague state of ours. They surveyed 28 states, and we put a caveat. It's hard to compare apples and oranges, but here's another effort to do something along those lines. And again, by almost any measure, one of the busiest. And so among those 20 states, we have the highest opinions per justice in 2016. And we had with 50 opinions per justice, which is second place was 27.3 opinions per justice. So they found that we had 50 opinions per justice. They had 27.43. And I'll have to say, on a note of personal privilege, I'll say that these opinions that are coming out of our court are as thorough and as thoughtful as they have ever been. And so we have no desire to back up off that pace as we move forward. And so the request for the third staff attorney in our court, in our chambers, is in an effort to embrace that workload. We have no desire to back away. We have no desire to be less thorough. We want to be able to continue that moving forward, and that's the biggest assistance we can have to be able to accomplish that into the future. And then I also want to add that in addition to those judicial functions, we have administrative functions throughout the judiciary as a whole. You'll see me again when I present the budget for the Judicial Council. We've divided up and tried to process administration issues throughout the entire judiciary. And as you know, we're not a unified court system, which means everything has to go through a process of saying please and can we and why shouldn't we. And so that takes time. We're glad to do it. But that's part of why we have to divide our efforts and our attentions. So the plan itself is broken down into 6 categories. The first category is the judge's individual chambers along with central staff. The second is the clerk's office. Third is the fiscal. Fourth is public information. 5 is reporters. And then lastly, technology. And so in that, I'll just go over the 2 that the chief mentioned that because they really are the priorities. The first being the staff attorney position, and then the second would be the priority of the facilities procurement coordinator. And just succinctly, that is the person that manages all the property GBA lease renewals within the BLIP system, which is what the bureaucrats know this system to be. They will manage all the vendor contracts and lease agreements and submit data to the state accounting officer. All the E-Verify requirements will be fulfilled by this person. They'll do the asset inventory and in the teamwork system, manage purchasing card, the P card, assist in ordering and processing delivery requests. All those other duties is assigned. They're currently scattered throughout the clerk's office. The base salary for that position is $47,225 with fringes of $29,000.
If I may interject, as Presiding Justice Melton said, this is spread out now among our clerk's office, our fiscal office, and technology office, and we have this all spread out. People are juggling things to try to handle this right now. It's very important to us.
Questions for the presiding justice or the chief justice of the Georgia Supreme Court? I think it's important for me just to say that the partnership between this committee and the courts of appeal in performing the 5-year plan was to educate members of this committee over for a long with a horizon of 5 years, so that you could see what each court anticipated over time. Oftentimes, the sentiment has been that the courts ask for things, and it's a continuous request of items. But I think if you see the projections that they have provided to you in the 5-year plan, which I know you've been provided, you can get a shape and a feel for how they're expecting to grow and develop as a court. And then from that, you all can ask specific policy questions about whether or not those expenditures are appropriate. Just because there is a 5-year plan does not mean that we are by any means wed to it, but it does give you far more insight into where they want to go and why they want to go in that direction. So I would encourage you to take time to review those 5-year plans from both courts, to understand them and to ask questions, either of Brian Groom or myself, or go directly to the courts and ask them yourselves as well. I think this is a good partnership. It helps us to see the horizon going forward.
And I would point out again, being a bank court, each case is reviewed by 9 justices, each one. I mean, that's the opinion comes out, but all 9 participate in each and every case. And as Presiding Justice Melton says now, it goes back and forth many, many times.
Mm-hmm.
And not to brag, but I'll put our court up as far as scholarly work, any court, anywhere, anytime.
Well, it should also be known to this committee that the justices are here this morning, bright and early, But in a few minutes, they're going to need to go back because they actually have oral arguments. Is that correct this morning?
That's correct.
Oral argument at 10.
At 10 o'clock. So let's try to keep our questions directed, pointed. Micah, go ahead.
Thank you, Justice, very much for being here this morning. Thank you for the overview that you've provided for us. I was trying to write quickly. There was one statistic I just want a clarification on. I believe it was the Illinois study where it was 58 1/3 for justices in Georgia.
From the University of Chicago.
University of Chicago. Okay. Thank you, Justice. The statistic that said 58 1/3 for justices in Georgia, where the mean was 28. What was the
Mean was 23.
mean? Was 23.
I think the next was,
And that was across the United States. That means.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I think.
And then, yes, does that answer your question, Mr. Chairman?
Absolutely. Yes, it does. Thank you.
So they're pumping out almost twice as many cases as compared to the average of any other state Supreme Court. And those cases are helpful because they help to resolve legal issues and disputes within the law or misunderstandings within the law in terms of litigation.
and one thing that is never seen, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, Mr. Green, is the administrative things that come through this court. Each justice is assigned certain areas of administration. Justice for Children Committee, Justice Namias. I've been the liaison with the committee for bar admissions. Justice Peterson and Justice Blackwell will be doing that. Justice Blackwell is the liaison with the bar. Justice Grant is looking after professionalism with Presiding Justice Melton, and it goes on and on. Everybody has substantial, and I think that the two things that surprised me the most when I went on Supreme Court was disciplinary matters. Each one is an opinion. Each one is voted on by 9. Each one is discussed. Some are sent back to bar council when we do that, and procure. So disciplinary and the administrative work was huge.
Mr. Chairman, I left out one stat that I have to make sure I convey to you. Our CERT grants are up 47%.
Okay. Representative Workheiser, go ahead.
Just two things. As a business person, I did spend some time on the 5-year plan this weekend. That's impressive. That was a good plan. And I had the fortune, Jay Stewart had the opportunity to come fill in, I guess, and we discussed that a little bit. So, but spent 30 years buying and selling small businesses, and I was impressed.
Thank you, sir.
And look, on the point that, and thank you for that comment. Presiding Justice Melton, the issue about CERT, just so that members of the public can understand what that means, because you're talking in Latin phrases that those that practice understand it, but the public would not know.
Right. So when we get cases from two sources, either from the trial court or from the Court of Appeals. After the jurisdictional shift, they more often will come from the Court of Appeals. And the way they come to us from the Court of Appeals is they petition for certiorari. And we have to decide whether we want to grant that petition or not. And so we have granted 47% over the previous year, from 2017 over 2016. And those are cases that we don't grant just because we think there might be a mistake. We will only grant cert in cases where we think there's gravity, where we need to speak to the area of law. And it could be a whole number of reasons why we feel like that there's gravity in the case. But it's more than error correction. It's to speak to the body of law.
And each one of those starts with central staff doing a memorandum, goes to the justice who it's assigned to, and then it is voted on and discussed by all 9. So,
And your chamber staff are the ones that are really working on the research and helping to draft those.
Central staff and our own elbow clerks, if you want to call it.
And we require, because they have gravity, we require oral argument in every case that we grant cert in.
An oral argument is 20 minutes per side, is that correct?
Except for death penalty cases.
Which is 30 minutes.
Correct. And our current rule is any attorney that wants oral argument in the case need only ask. If they ask, we'll grant it. But it's mandatory in cert cases.
So that is a significant period of your time in the week that you're spending hearing
Yes,
the oral
and
argument, which allows for public transparency, to hear cases, to see and visualize and hear the questions that the justices are asking, which helps educate the bar, the attorneys, as well as the public.
Which is another metric by which we are one of the highest in the country in terms of days spent on the bench.
And that means that as justices, you have to prepare for those oral arguments so that you can ask meaningful questions.
Bench briefs are done by every chambers and circulated to the other chambers.
And
4 days a week,
And-
4 days a month on oral argument.
And if I may, let me speak to the reason why we do that. It's not just so we can show off. We feel like we are the court of last resort, but we're not right because we're brilliant. We're right because we have to sit and touch it a lot of times. We have to talk about it with our staff. We have to talk about it with each other. So it is the process by which we have a level of comfort with that what we produce at the end of the day is something that our state deserves. So that's why we insist on that level of teamwork and transparency and touching it many times throughout the process.
And I would presume that since you're here this morning, you had to do a little extra work this weekend.
Yes, sir.
So, thank you. Any other questions from members of the committee? Thank you all for hearing this, and thank you for being here this morning. And we'll let you retire so you can get back to the people's business of interpreting the Constitution and applying the laws of the state.
Thank you, John.
Judge Billy Ray, good to see you, sir. Thank you for being here. And with that, with nothing else, we will stand adjourned to go back to the people's house.